12 years, 177 episodes, and a whole lot of disappointed fans. What happened? If you live under a rock and don't know what The Walking Dead is, then you're in for an easy explained zombie-verse video, as the dead have taken over the world, leaving the living, well, much less like the living. The idea in creating this show was to have a zombie movie that just never ended, and how people would handle the growing conflicts with the dead, the living, and themselves. And yes, this is based off the comic book series written by Robert Kirkman.
To me, it felt like the show lost its identity. Well, that means when you tune in every week, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you know it feels within the confines of the characters' personalities, the settings, and the overall structure. Character arcs are growing mostly, and as a fan, you have a favorite or two. The first 2 seasons are about the walkers. They are scary at first, our characters do not know how to fight them, and they were the threat. The identity of the show is that most of the survivors didn't know how to fight the walkers without a gun, but bullets were scarce, and walkers only go down with headshots. And of course, humanity is still a factor, and these characters are morally good, something that remains challenged mainly by Shane. Shane would inevitably show that morals can't apply anymore. Rick and the group would have to make ethically challenging decisions in order to survive. Rick killing Shane can honestly be its own video in its entirety, and this is the identity that brings us through seasons 3 and 4 as walkers become a little bit less of a threat. We quickly learn that the group can now take out walkers and are getting better at hunting, sneaking around, and they are fast and smart. Walkers aren't scary anymore. The identity of the show has changed, and it changes fast when Rick meets a group of inmates in the prison that they find in season 3. The prisoners aren't taking any chances, and neither is Rick. It's clear turf war is brewing, and rather than taking any chances, Rick kills them after trying to help them for a little bit, but this is only the second kill in the entire show, and it happened 2 episodes into season 3. The entire character in the show is changing in 2 episodes. That is quality TV. Not only do the survivors know they have to kill, they will have to kill often as everyone is a threat. The identity of the show has become clear. People are the problem. People are scary. Rick shows all the survivors how to fight as they battle the show's first real villain, the governor. Still hanging on to his morals, and mostly because they know they're outnumbered, Rick spends most of the season trying to avoid a fight, but it inevitably happens. The governor does end up surviving the fight, and that takes us into season 4. Season 4 is a little weird. It shows a different approach with a flu-like plague taking over most of the first 6 episodes, with 2 episodes being solely dedicated to the governor's return. This would take us to the mid-season finale, which was a huge turning point for the show because not only was it a loss of life, there was the loss of the place that they had deemed very, very safe. Since I'm a sheep and didn't read the comics until I finished the show, I actually had no idea this would happen and thought the prison was going to last more than just a season and a half. I did end up liking it though because it brought back an old style of The Walking Dead where they're constantly on the move, but this time people are much more deadly. They know that, and it's kill on sight out here. Rick encounters a group of bandits, Joe's group, and other than that we didn't know much about them, except that they were killers. They were traveling with Daryl for a few episodes, which would end up saving Rick in the end, but he would have to take matters into his own hands. He would have to bite out Joe's throat in a confrontation in order to survive. The identity of the show is shifted to thinking outside the box. This happens because without the fortress to hide behind and the numbers to reinforce you, you have to manipulate your opponent into beating them intellectually, to finding their weakness and exploiting it to the extreme. This is why Rick goes this far. This is a nice transition to the Terminus group, a group of cannibals that capture their prey like our characters and actually eat them. Now this was disturbing at first, on rewatch it's not as bad, but they're only there for 1 episode. No one expected it to only be 1 episode, but it would transition the show so quickly because now Rick's power is really showing to emerge. He will do whatever it takes to survive. With Rick going to the extremes like biting someone's throat out, it wasn't too surprising that he was able to take care of the Terminus group quickly. He's able to take advantage of the cockiness by the Terminus group, who are turned into the Hunters after that very episode, then bringing on one of my favorite episodes, 4 Walls and a Roof. This is when Rick is really showed to be deceptive, smart, and cunning. He's able to take out the Hunters who not too long ago carried all the power. He transitions that to a hostage exchange in Atlanta with Dawn's group. By season 5 and 6, you know this group would do anything it takes to survive, including the possibility of taking over the Alexandrians, a group that they come across in later of season 5. At the time, the Alexandrians weren't as good at surviving, but they had big walls to hide behind, something that Rick considered taking advantage of. This was the peak of the show, but ultimately Rick decides to show them how to survive instead of taking them over. Ratings were at their highest and viewership was skyrocketing. The show had really taken over. And then it happened. The first half of season 6 was pretty good. It showed a horde takeover with a bunch of cool deaths and, the group splitting up and having to fight on their own out in the open. But the second half was a little slow, following one of the greatest episodes in the mid-season finale of Return, episode 9. It was all a slow build up to Negan's entrance. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the best fit for Negan that I could imagine. His character was captivating, comedic, and overwhelmingly frightening, but his arrival would send the show into a spiral that it would never recover from. The show at the time had a plethora of entertaining characters that were just fun to watch. Rick, of course, Daryl, Glenn, Michonne, Carol, Abraham, Maggie were among the fan favorites. Negan's introduction shifted the dynamic of the show, and I would go as far as to say it broke the show. The identity of the show had developed into something that Negan would ruin. Killing Glenn and Abraham were among the massive mistakes the show made, and in fact is still never recovered from 7 years later until the end of the show. And no, I'm not over it yet. Part 1 of the problem was that Glenn and Abraham were wildly entertaining. They were stories that were motivating and moving, and their characters were relatable. There was never a dull moment with those two on screen. And I get that's how Glenn dies in the comic, and Abraham already outlived his cartoon counterpart, but I don't care. The Whatever It Takes identity that the show had built up was shattered, and not just for 1 or 2 or even half the season. The entire 16 episode season was brutally boring and unwatchable and skippable on rewatch. It's like Scott Gimple and Greg Nicotero wrote a moment that was too big for them to come up with what would happen next. Episodes were loaded with filler, and no one was entertaining to watch except for Negan, ironically. Season 8 had some cool action for all about 2 or 3 episodes, and then the future of the show, Carl, was killed off for God knows whatever reason. And after all that, Negan is finally defeated, so the group could spend 5 episodes building a bridge in season 9 as Rick leaves the show after saving Negan. I get that the bridge that they were building in the first 2 episodes was supposed to be a metaphor for Negan's survivors connecting to Rick's group, but most of it fails as the audience because we don't care about the saviors, and then a good portion of them die anyways. They aren't someone we root for at any point, but sure, let's dedicate half a season to them. Oh yeah, Maggie leaves the show too. In a span of about 10 episodes, we lose Carl, we lose Maggie, and we lose Rick. The core of the show is gone, the identity of the show is a muck, and almost all of our favorite characters are gone. After Rick disappears, they have a 7-year time skip where they add a bunch of filler characters that mostly suck, and all the guns are gone too, by the way, just poof, gone, even though there was no record of any of their wars in that 7-year time period. But yeah, all the bullets and guns are just gone except for Rick's python, conveniently. Eugene is good at killing now, and good thing that happened off camera because that's how you develop characters. And then we introduced to the Whisperers. The Whisperers weren't too bad, but we spent all this time developing Henry in the later parts of season 9 just for him to kill him off, cause fuck all of us, I guess. Enid, remember her? Yeah, she dies too. Sadiq had some cool moments and actually survives a murder spree just to die a few weeks later anyways. Negan once again was the only entertaining character as the show goes on in season 9 and 10, and I even thought Daryl was a little boring without Rick. Defeating the Whisperers didn't even feel to move me at all since all I did was kill a bunch of whack characters anyways. Overall, seasons 9 and 10 just felt like someone playing with like a bunch of Walking Dead action figures and just having some fun. It pains me again to season 11 because this season spans over a year and a half of real time and felt really dragged out. This season felt like kind of 3 different seasons in one. There were the Reapers that occupy the first 8 episodes. About 6 of those episodes were actually pretty good though. The next 2, not so much. The characters were pretty scattered at this point. There was like 9 different storylines going on. Because at the same time, some of the survivors found the Commonwealth, which I'll get into in a little bit. Overall, The Walking Dead just didn't feel like the same and the stakes were pretty low. A bunch of boring politics and cliche as our characters make their way to the Commonwealth, which is a government-style civilization. So in the span of 1 season, we're fighting religious zealots, then playing White House, and then we're detectives with a splash of slave labor workforce. Yeah, I don't know. I would say though, I really enjoyed the episode Faith, and it actually shines on one of my favorite scenes in a long time. I love when Negan finally got a taste of his own medicine all these years later, especially in the fashion that it was delivered. Negan has always prided himself on being a man of his word, as much as we all hate to see it. So when he offers himself to die, I thought that the season might actually take an interesting turn. And when the Commonwealth lieutenant who looks to execute him suddenly turns a gun to Negan's wife instead, I'm like, okay, this is The Walking Dead. Why couldn't we see more of this? Then they kind of followed the scene at the end a little bit with an unrealistic pep talk from King Ezekiel to the soldiers to get them to turn on their commander, which somehow works. Also, Negan and his wife survived, which I didn't like because it was a little anticlimactic, but I'll get to that later. And of course, we had to end with a Walker threat. So they actually did bring in the variant Walkers into the show so they could set up for the spin-offs. They were only in the last 2 episodes, but those last 2 episodes were actually pretty good. There were some very powerful moments like Luke and his wife dying, as well as Judith getting shot. Also, the governor, Pamela, shows her true colors when she sacrifices the workers so that way her and her elite friends can survive. Very cliche. Mercer was a pretty cool character who was the commander of the army. He actually saves the day by turning the Commonwealth army against their leader and governor. The group also manages to blow up like miles worth of land to kill a bunch of walkers, which they set up in a whole 5 seconds. Then of course they had a dose of fan service with Rick and Michonne at the end. The story pretty much wraps up there as Daryl rides into the distance to go find Rick 7 years later after his disappearance. Alright, now I'm coming back to the whole Negan and his wife situation from before. The reason I feel we started to see less deaths in major characters as the seasons went on is because the Walking Dead franchise knows it could build spin-off shows off these characters. Now, The Walking Dead isn't the only franchise guilty of just writing characters out. First Rick, then Maggie, Michonne, sparing Carol and Negan in seasons 10 and 11. All just made it clear that the franchise is gonna milk the shit out of these characters in fan service TV shows that'll probably feature 8 to 10 episodes a season, with 1 or 2 of those serving to the overall greater plot. They even sent Morgan to try to save Fear the Walking Dead, which also didn't work out that well. Marvel and Star Wars are paving the way for spin-offs, but you can clearly tell that around season 8 they stopped killing off major characters. Jesus and Carl were exceptions to this, but of course those character deaths felt forced at the time, which is probably because the actor wanted out or AMC was just done with them. Reports are conflicting. Character deaths used to serve to the greater plot and it would change how our characters would act and feel going forwards. Without that element, the stakes felt really low and the show didn't feel like The Walking Dead anymore. This sort of plot armor took all the suspense out of the show and overall ruined its identity. I just can't get excited for these new spin-offs, these new shows. I'll probably end up watching it, of course, because it's fan service, just like what Star Wars and Marvel are doing. But it's really unfortunate that The Walking Dead went in this direction and couldn't just wrap it up. Let me know what you think in the comments and follow me on social media, and I'll see you in the next video.